Welcome back, everyone. So let's jump right into it. It is time for transmission top cover and shifter. So we've got the prototype version with the production version side by side on the bench. We'll do the usual compare contrast between the two, beginning with the casting numbers. And of course, the 10X prefix is the Minneapolis-Moline prototype number. So we have a 10X 5678 on this one. Production number then is a 10A 7071. 10A is Minneapolis-Moline production prefix, sometimes 11A, most of the time 10A. So some differences between them, but all in all, they're still pretty similar. They even look pretty similar on the back side. So we've got all of our gates and everything back there. Check this one out, and much the same. Now, you can tell the prototype version is a lot thicker casting, just a lot heavier all around. I mean, look at how much thinner it is on the production one right there. Another main difference is you can see this hooked pipe that comes out of there. That's actually the vent tube, breather tube for the transmission area. Now, the production one does not have that, but the breakdown in the parts manual for the production 445 shows that hooked over vent in the cover that's over the top of the ampli-torque compartment. So all they did was move it from right here on the prototype to right there on the production. All right. Next, we look at the shifter itself. So you can see the shift lever, round rod, and we have a friction fit knob, rubber knob that goes over the end of it, as evidenced right here. 5/8 diameter round rod, rubber knob's gone. That's pretty standard. But then we look at everything we have going on here, and I assessed it, and I'm pretty sure this was two different shifters that have been welded to make one, because, well, we start out about the correct diameter down here, but it just gradually gets, you know, smaller and smaller around until we get to the weld, and now we're back to a straight 5/8 shaft that finally starts tapering about right here, and it tapers to like a threaded point, and there's where the knob attaches. We referenced that to the archive photo. You can see it was definitely a straight shaft shifter, and it looks like it would have been like a consistent 5/8 diameter up to about this point right here where this starts tapering. You can see it's like it tapers right beneath the knob, and granted the knob is masked off in this photo because I think they just finished painting it, but it's about the right size. I'm confident this is likely, at least from here on out, the remains of the original shifter for X231. I have no idea what led up to what we see right here. They either broke it off or there's been so much hackery going on down in here. That'll become evident later. I'd say that's definitely a down on the farm fix, but here on out, I'm taking as original. Looking at the gear shift pattern now, the layout is the same between both of them. We have 134 on the top, 5.2 and reverse on the bottom. 134 on the top, 5.2 reverse, but of course the production version is a lot bolder, a lot easier to see. We look at just the styling kind of the tower box, if you will. So here's the prototype one. We're flanged up at the front, and then it kind of, you know, flows back, drops a little bit. Then this back corner's rounded off and just kind of streamlined a bit. And they just went much more utilitarian on the production version. It's pretty much just a box with some slightly rounded corners. We've got this Welsh plug that has been driven into the prototype cover. I don't know what it was for. We look on the back side. This boss is directly below it, and there's a passage that went all the way through into the transmission compartment. I don't know if that was from a piece that was deleted through development, or if that was just a provision that was never utilized. The last major difference, you can see the large plug that's on the top of the production cover for filling the gear compartments with oil. There is no plug present on top of the prototype cover, and that just made me realize I don't really see any other convenient place to fill any of these compartments with gear oil, because you've got the cover over the ampli-torque, which has the dash panel on top of it, so that's not a convenient place. The top cover is bolted down with 8 bolts. That's not a convenient place. And the top cover for this back end housing has the 3-point lift on top of it. That's not a convenient place either. So I don't know where you'd fill this from, but details like that usually become more evident as we move along. Okay, so I've looked at this 8 ways from Sunday, and I have determined that in order to appreciate how unrefined the prototype setup is, we should disassemble the production version first. I believe it's going to shed some light. It'll be worth it. So we start on the back side. I've already had this apart once so I could clean it and be able to handle it, and you know, we can do some sort of coherent demonstration. So we have the gate and the actual actuator that grabs onto and moves the tops of those shift forks, and we've got this bump out right here and a matching one down on the other side. That is in place so that you can drive this roll pin out of the actuator portion, all right? And when you drive it out, it just goes down and settles in one of those pockets, so it's got room to come out the back side. Once you get that roll pin out, this actuator will slide on the main plunger shaft. So that means you can then pull this plunger shaft far enough out at the front. I just have a piece of wire in there right now to remove this roll pin that goes through that fork, all right? And look at the torch debauchery that has happened on this. That's actually pretty common when you get into these, because that's the easy way to access this roll pin. Most people don't want to take the top cover off to get in here and do it right, and that's definitely wrong, but it happens. So anyhow, once you've loosened the actuator, the shaft comes out far enough, you can remove that roll pin, shift lever comes off. At that point, you can withdraw the plunger shaft, all right? And you can see the work that they'd been doing. These like to hog out and wear. They've brazed that up, made it a lot tighter. Now the actuator and the gate comes right out, can be separated. And the last piece is this assist spring that is in behind the shift lever. So yeah, they've torched both sides out on this. Oh, I hate it, but that's what they do. So it's actually a pretty straightforward disassembly process on this refined version. Now, we'll attempt this one. Okay, so a few things are different here. We've got the roll pin up at the top of the actuator. That one does not have a relief on either side, okay? You can tell, you can see we're all flat-sided there and on the back side. We don't have the benefit of these 2 bump outs on the inside where that roll pin actually has a place to go. That's going to be something that is working against us. We don't quite have the serviceability factor with this this one-off prototype piece. Another thing, we have the same torch hackery that's been going on up at the front. They've hogged a great big hole in each side, and on a 10X casting, that just hurts to see that. What hurts even more is I believe this cleanly drilled hole right here was put there by the factory because, well, they've eliminated the roll pin and they've put a bolt with a nut in there, and I'm pretty confident they were accessing that from each side through those torch holes. But if you look, can you see the end of that bolt that is perfectly in line with that cleanly drilled hole? I have to believe that was a factory provision access point to get in there with a punch and drive that roll pin in and out. So they either didn't know or they didn't care. We got a couple big holes we need to try and decide what we're going to do with now. So being that we have actually an easier time getting this shift lever out of the fork with this bolt, let's just go ahead and do that first. Well, that's pretty much awful. No threads left in that one. The end of it got so beat up from, you know, being too big to fit in the space that it had. That made that part a little bit difficult. Let's see if we can get, all right. Can't believe there's any play in that, huh? Wow. Okay. Yeah, that was well hogged out. It's more oval than anything. That's why this pretty much drifted around in about a 6-inch circle out at the knob end. Oh, you poor thing. Working on that actuator roll pin now. I don't have a tool here to pull it. They do have tools to do that. We don't have one here today. So what I did was I decided to drive it through as far as I could until it started hitting the other side of the housing. All right. It's just a roll pin. I'm not afraid to sacrifice it. They're easily replaceable, so I'm just going to see if I can just rip it the rest of the way out from this side. There, we got it. Okay, so I think the hole that the roll pin occupied has some burrs around the edges because the plunger shaft moved a little bit in the actuator and then it tightened right up. So from the Ford toolbox, we have the vice grip attachment slide hammer puller. This can come in quite handy from time to time. I just put the mangled up shifter bolt back in there because it's already wrecked. There we go. Worked very well. Plunger rod. Yeah, it looks like it just pulled a little bit around that hole. Here's the gate and the actuator, and look at this. It's all handmade. That whole thing. We're gonna have to break that down a little bit more, just the construction of it. To finish off the disassembly of the top cover though, I'm looking in here around where that plunger rod exits, and the production cover has a lip seal. This one does not, but I started digging around and found a really dried up crunchy O-ring in there. So they threw an O-ring around that shaft on the prototype. I was wondering if they had some kind of a seal in there or not. And that has definitely seen better days. Let's see if we can at least get a piece of it out of there. Yeah, there's there's a little bit of it. There's the rest of it. All right, I'm gonna pull this vent tube out too, and it's about the only thing I can think this shifter is still good for, so yeah. It's perfect for this job. I think we're completely plugged. So now that we've got everything apart, I mentioned I was going to come back to the prototype gate and actuator. So the way they made this, they keyholed the slot in here. You see that where it rounds out on each side? And that's because the actuator has like those wings on it, okay? So to get it apart, you just hinge it up through, and it's tight, but there you go. Through that opening there, and yeah, so the gate here pretty much the same as the production. All right, not a lot different there at all. Main difference being they hot riveted the gate halves together on the prototype, whereas they're just bolted with bolts and nuts on the production version. Otherwise, they're the same piece. And of course, we've got the keyhole style slot in the prototype, and it's just a straight through slot in the production because the actuators differ. So here's the prototype one, and this was milled out of pretty much, I think, one solid piece of steel until we get up here. It looks like they just cut a couple of grooves in on each side so that it created the wing on the bottom. You can still see kind of some file or maybe hacksaw marks where they hand made the groove, tapered it back right here and up here to help it guide. Here's our travel stop. It's a roll pin, and here's just a round piece of basically heavy wall tubing. I don't think it's pipe, but you can see some weld lines there and there. Same on the other side. They just slit the top open a little bit, just enough to get it onto that plunger rod, and that is a neat piece, and it shows the evolution. This was the idea somebody had in their head. They created it, handmade, and then it evolved into this, just a solid cast piece, but the basic design is still there. They skinnied up the bottom of it. Otherwise, offsets and everything are about the same. We have the same travel stop roll pin. It's got a full rounded bore on the top, and then we gave it a 10A7803 part number. So that's the evolution right there, from idea to finished product. That's pretty neat. Another difference, although slight, so this is the prototype plunger rod. It's a 5/8 diameter, just like all the shift rails in the transmission, but the production one bumped up to 3/4 in diameter. You can tell the difference between them when you put them side by side. So yeah, they beefed up the plunger for the production, and I think that was a good idea because I thought my difficulty in removing this from the cover was because we had maybe some burrs around that roll pin hole. No, I found that it is bent. See that gap right there? It's not just bent by a little bit either. It's bent by quite a lot. So we've got work to do with this classic X231. It's not going to give me any freebies whatsoever. As far as this assist spring goes for the shifter in the production cover, I saw no trace of one ever having been in the prototype. So that was probably an upgrade that they decided to make to try and get this shifter mechanism to have a little bit more of a positive feel. Like I've said before, I've never been a fan of these because there's just too many pivots in there. You have the gate that pivots side to side, kind of carries the actuator along with it, but then the actuator will plunge in and out, and there's just too much slack in everything, even when it's all properly tight. But on the topic of the gates, about the final difference I noticed was, so we've got these roll pins that are driven in for basically travel stops, limiter stops for that gate. So those roll pins engage just on the inside of that of those flanges on each end, and you can see the bumps on the top. That was for the roll pin bores. That's where they drilled them. So the prototype one stops the actuator on the inside of the flange. The production one stops the actuator on the outsides of the flange, and that's just a solid round pin right there. So it's same concept, just done a little bit differently. And you can see the pins were straight through bores on this one. You can just see the top of it there. Barely see the top of it there. That one was worn just a little bit more. But aside from that, everything else is pretty much the same. And I almost forgot, we brought the old postal scale out once again because I mentioned earlier how the prototype casting was noticeably beefier, heavier than the production version. So let's do a comparison real quick. Without breaking the scale, we'll just go easy on it. So here's the prototype top cover, 17 1/4 pounds. There is some heft to it, so let's check it against the production cover. I can tell you already it's noticeably lighter. 12 3/4 pounds. So that's about a 30% weight reduction between the two. But that pretty much keeps pace with everything we've seen up to this point anyhow. The major castings have all been pretty comparable between the prototype and production, but the more minor castings, like this top cover here, they've been a lot heavier. So we're completely through it. Decision-making time. If this plunger rod was only bent and that's all that was wrong with it, I'd straighten it and call it good. But we've also got a scarred up O-ring surface, and we need to bring the holes in quite a bit to eliminate some wear, some play on that fork end. So coupling all those things together, we're in the same boat as we were with the transmission shift rails. You're almost time ahead just making something that's all new and is tight and right. We've got the shifter. My first inclination was to cut it off above this weld line, salvage what was left, and make a new bottom portion to graft it onto. But, well, we've got a pretty good crack that's developing right here. Goes all the way up the side of the shift knob, and it's halfway through already. I did some research. I'm confident that is a earlier model ZB tractor thread-on shifter knob. So looking at the ZB parts manual, here's the breakdown right here. That is the UT223 knob, widely available aftermarket. I think I'm, again, just time and effort ahead, just making an all-new shift handle, get a new knob for it, and we'll retain this one for the archives. The last bit of soul searching I have to do is regarding the heinous hackery that's been done to the box on the 10X casting. So we're 90% sure this was done down on the farm. Do we just leave these and call it part of the history? Do we dress them up so they're not so noticeably rough torched in, or do we fill them completely? I'm going to be thinking on that one for a little while. So that's where we stand with everything. Typical X231. This tractor hands out no freebies. You have to work for every inch of ground that you win. So I'm going to stay busy here. Let's keep this ball rolling. I hope to see you all back again.